I'm a female, and I've always been small for my age. At the age of 5, I was the size of a 3-year-old, yet I was already attending the first grade. The school taught us about stranger danger, teaching us to make as much noise, kick, bite, scratch, and aim for the crotch if any unknown adult tried to take us away from our parents or yards. I'm so glad that I paid attention to that advice. When I was 5 years old, my mom used to let me play downstairs in the parking lot of our apartment building where we lived. She would not come downstairs with me because she believed that we lived in a safe neighborhood. Terrytown, Louisiana is not that safe. It's a 15-minute drive from New Orleans, and a lot of people pass through, tourists and locals. As I rode my bike towards the road, and then back towards the wooden gate at the back of the parking lot, I noticed a small red car pull up. My first thought was that it was a new person renting an apartment there. We must have a new neighbor moving in, I thought. I paid him no more attention for a few minutes. When I turned around to go back towards the road, past the car, someone jumped out and wrapped one arm around my belly and then lifted me off my bike. I started to scream and kick immediately, since that's what they taught us in school. The next thing he did was try to cover my mouth with his other hand, but since my mouth was already open, I was able to bite down on his finger, and I bit hard. I focused on trying to kick my short little legs backwards between his legs, and then he dropped me on the concrete. I felt like I broke my butt bone, which I know now is not a real thing. I was 5. It would actually be my tailbone or pelvis. I looked over to the right, where his little red car was parked. I noticed that he already had his back door open. This was the early 90s, and my stepdad had a child lock in his car for safety. I assumed this man likely had it in his car as well. He ran to the car, slammed the back door, ran around to the driver door, and backed out. Then he braked so hard that I can still hear that screech in my ears today, at the age of 35. After this, he pulled off and I never saw him again. I ran upstairs and told my mother she needed to call the police because I was almost kidnapped. She told me, "They're going to put you on a lie detector test and they'll know you're lying." I couldn't believe what she was saying, so I told her, "Well, call them. If they put me on the test, then they'll know what I'm telling is the truth, and they can go find him." I found out from my mom in my 20s that the reason she didn't want to call the police was because she had an attachment. What a protective mother I had. The worst part of all of this was that when my daughter turned 5, I developed a case of agoraphobia, terrified of leaving the house because something bad would happen to her. Also, I've got this guilt that makes me think that maybe I got away, but who knows how many children in my neighborhood he actually took before or after this attempt. Who knows what he did to who. This was extremely traumatizing for me, and it doesn't go away with time. I get reminded of it every day with my daughter. She never plays outdoors alone, ever. When I was 12 years old, I had a terrifying encounter that still haunts me to this day. It was the late 90s, and the whole stranger danger thing was going on. We had heard warnings from adults and teachers not to talk to strangers, but being naive kids, we didn't worry. Our teachers even told us to watch out for a man in a white sedan who had been seen driving slowly through some of the neighborhoods around our school. Nobody ever said what the man did, just to watch out for him. It was a sunny afternoon on a Saturday, and my friends and I were playing at a park near my house. There was a small woods at the back, with houses along both sides, and a road at the front. There was an old jungle gym at the center, and a sports field farther back near the woods. We often met there and played around, and sometimes went to one of our houses, or found something else to do. It was me, my best friend Brianne, and her younger sister Ashley. We were just sitting on the swings, talking about nothing in particular, when a middle-aged woman approached us with a friendly smile. We were all uncomfortable right away, but we didn't know how to get out of it. We were always taught to be polite to adults, so we just sat there while she talked. She gave off the vibe of a big sister, or maybe a cool aunt. I can't remember much of what she actually said, but she seemed to be trying pretty hard to fit in with us. It was weird. Eventually, she tried to lure us away from the park towards her car. Ashley got up and started following the woman, but Brienne stopped her. My gut told me something was wrong. Brienne and I seemed to be on the same page, but we didn't know how to get out of that situation. I know it seems stupid now. Why not just run away? But back then it didn't seem so easy. Before I could say or do anything, one of my neighbors, Mr. Pratt, walked by. He was my brother's best friend's dad, and I kind of knew him. He was walking his dog in the area, and he noticed the strange woman and our frightened expressions. He approached us with a concerned look on his face, and immediately recognized the situation for what it was. "Girls, stay right here," Mr. Pratt commanded firmly. His words snapped us out of our hesitation, and we huddled together, shaking with fear. The woman must have sensed trouble and fled the scene. After she left, we got a glimpse of her car. It was a dark blue minivan, not the white car that we were warned about. We don't know if she was connected to that other creeper, but the cars didn't match what we were told to watch out for. Mr. Pratt called the police later, and they arrived shortly after. We hardly said a word to them. We just watched from a distance as Mr. Pratt talked to them. At the time, we were pretty confused. I didn't actually grasp how serious it was back then. I was relieved, but I thought that woman was just some annoying person interrupting our day, not much more than that. Mr. Pratt stayed with us until our parents came to pick us up. My mom thanked him, and we went home. The incident left a lasting impact on me. I eventually came to understand how serious it was. Things were pretty tense in my neighborhood after that. My school had an assembly on the dangers of talking to strangers. It was big news in our area. The rest of that summer was spent indoors, or at one of my friends' houses. We weren't allowed out alone for a long time after this. I was mad at the time, but now I get it. Back in 2005, when I was in the 8th grade, my school organized a trip to the aquatic center in our town. I was excited about it for a while. It was a day off from school, and the place was massive. I had been there with my family, and they had an Olympic-sized pool and a really high diving board. They also had a pretty decent water slide. We had a great time when we were there. I was with my class and all my friends. There were 2 classes actually, which meant around 40 or 50 kids total. There was a school bus that we took there. When it was time to leave, my friends and I rushed to the changing room to get out of our wet swimsuits. When I finished changing, I went to the bathroom. I guess I took a little too long, because when I got out, I realized that my class had already left. I began to panic as I hurriedly grabbed my bag and rushed outside. I looked around frantically trying to spot my classmates in the parking lot, but they were nowhere to be found. I was at the spot where the bus dropped us off before, right in front of the large glass building. I was waiting and crying for about 5 minutes when a man in an old car pulled up beside me.
"Hey there, are you lost? Do you need a ride?"
he asked. Part of me felt relieved that somebody was offering to help, but a little voice inside me warned me to be cautious. Before I could respond, my teacher, Mrs. Turner, came rushing towards me. She was shouting about how worried she was and that everybody was looking everywhere for me. She said that with a mix of concern and relief. She told me to stay put while she handled the situation. When I turned around again, the man in the car was gone. Mrs. Turner explained that my classmates had noticed I was missing and alerted the teachers. It turned out they were just around the other side of the building. For some reason, the bus picked us up there instead. As we walked back to the school bus, I couldn't help but think about the stranger in the car. He had seemed nice, but something didn't feel right. There's no reason that a stranger should be offering a ride to a young girl. If he really wanted to help, he would call somebody or tell the staff at the aquatic center. It's beyond suspicious. His intentions must have been bad. Either that, or he was incredibly ignorant about how that would look. The incident left me shaken, but I moved on quickly. It wasn't until years later that I realized how close I came to a really bad situation. Looking back, I'm pretty sure I would have been kidnapped if Miss Turner hadn't found me when she did. I was desperate at that moment and not thinking straight. I might have actually gotten into that guy's car. I'm a 30-year-old American man, and at the time this happened, I was 24 years old. Before I begin, there are a few key details. When this occurred, I was 6 foot 3 inches tall and 180 pounds. For the metric system users, that's 1.9 meters and 81.6 kilos. I was born with a few heart conditions, so while I can run, and quite fast, I run out of stamina in about 30 seconds, at which point I have to stop to catch my breath. At the end of the street that this happened on, there's a large cherry tree that prevents you from seeing my apartment from the previously mentioned street. I had just finished my shift as a busboy at a local pizza place. It was around 11 p.m. I headed out to make my way home. On the way, everything was entirely normal. Despite being just over the city line from Boston, it was peaceful and quiet. I took a left onto the street that was a near straight shot to my apartment. Normally I would head down on the left sidewalk, but some people were hanging out and all that fun stuff. As a result, they were blocking the sidewalk, and with cars parked on the side of the street, there wouldn't have been enough space for me to squeeze by. I also didn't want to walk through somebody's get-together, so I decided to use the sidewalk on the right. I began what I thought was going to be a calm walk home that would maybe last 5 minutes. As I was heading down the street, a black SUV with tinted windows drove by, slowly. Then it stopped. I stopped and looked at it. The fact that it stopped was unusual. Firstly, because there was nothing preventing it from continuing onward. And secondly, no one ever stopped on that street. And I mean no one. Even the mailman parked on a side street. The passenger's side door opened, and a guy got out. He was younger than me, a little shorter, but also a little heavier. Don't ask me how I knew he was younger, because it was pretty dark. Just call it a gut instinct. He made eye contact with me, and at that very second, my brain yelled for me to get out of there. I began to continue, and that's when they began to drive in reverse, keeping pace with me. The driver's side window came down, and the guy driving was absolutely massive. I don't know if he was taller than me, but this guy was really huge. He was the kind of dude who could carry a whole fridge by himself. I began to walk faster, and of course they could keep pace. At this point, the driver was paying attention to the road, and the passenger was staring at me. Not just a regular stare, but the kind when you know the person's sole intent is to hurt you. I crossed a four-way intersection rather quickly, then I began to jog. These guys blew through it the same way you'd blow through an empty mall parking lot. I was really freaking out at that point. There was no way I could outrun these guys, and my apartment was up ahead. I reached into my pocket and got my keys. If I had to run, I'd get inside faster than they could get out. Right at that second, I saw my neighbor get into his car, turn it on, and reverse. These guys slammed on the brakes, and I booked it. In about 10 seconds flat, I ran 30 feet, went up the front steps, unlocked, and then closed the heavy front door. The kind of door that won't stay open, unless you put a cinder block in front of it. As I was getting inside, I heard my neighbor and these two guys yelling at each other. One of them said,
"Fuck you. We almost caught him."
I told my roommate the next day, and she told me that over the past few days, she had seen a black van driving around in the neighborhood, one that she'd never seen before. On top of that, I told a different roommate about this, and he said, "Oh yeah, every year we devote an entire half day to the kids at school so they know how to identify human trafficking. There's a lot of that around here. So to all you guys out there listening to this, always be aware of your surroundings. If something feels off, it probably is. And lastly, make sure you're in good enough shape so that you can get somewhere safe as fast as possible." This happened 4 years ago when I was 16. Nothing scary has ever really happened to me apart from this. One night I woke up, desperately needing to use the toilet. It was pitch black. Only the vague orange light of the street lamps through my blinds made my room barely visible. The first thing I noticed was that the air was absolutely freezing. It was winter after all, but I didn't realize how poor my house was at retaining heat overnight. The thought passed, and I fumbled my way along the hallway, holding onto the banister as I made my way to the toilet. I waved my hand, about to pull the string that turned on the light. I pulled it, then the overly bright toilet light blared and I squinted. I did my business, and just as I was about to stand up, I looked through the slightly ajar toilet door downstairs. I should note that I can see the front door from the toilet, and there was a window at the right of the front door, and some translucent white curtains over it, so I could see outside. I looked down the stairs at the door. It was very dark, but the toilet light illuminated it a little bit. There was someone standing at the window. All I could see was a dark silhouette, but I could tell it was a man, just under 6 feet tall. My first thought was that it was the postman, but it was 4 o'clock in the morning, so I knew it was not the postman. My heart began to thump furiously against my chest as I watched. The person didn't move, he just stood there for what seemed like an eternity, but it was likely around 10 seconds. He knew someone was awake, so why wasn't he moving? Thoughts raced through my head as I was wondering if I should shout down and acknowledge my presence. As I contemplated my options, he suddenly turned and walked away. I stood in place blinking. Then when my legs finally obeyed my thoughts a few seconds later, I quickly ran down the stairs to check if the door was locked. It was. I pulled back the curtains and peered out the window, but the driveway and street was empty. All I could see was the early morning frosted pavement and orange streetlights. Surely he didn't go down the path into my back garden. Surely not, I thought. I sprang into action again and ran to the kitchen. My back door was wide open. Not even joking. My mom must have left it open because she used to smoke there before going to bed. It was pitch black outside, and I was terrified when I saw a figure coming out from the darkness into my house. I ran and slammed it quickly, and then locked the door with fumbling fingers, and I stood still. What if he was in my house already? I thought. I stood and strained my ears to listen for anyone. All I could hear was deafening silence. I quickly flung open every cupboard downstairs that could fit someone in it, and they were all empty. I looked through the curtains again and couldn't see anyone. He must have ran away. I woke my mom up, and she sat with me until I calmed down. Nothing ever happened since.